Hey Blenders, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor at Cinema Blend and a co-host of the ReelBlend podcast, and we have a very special interview for you with director Michael Mohan, whose film Immaculate is making a ton of headlines as it roars into theaters, primarily because of Sydney Sweeney, who is getting a producer credit on this and is, I think, starting to show through this the types of projects that she wants to get behind. They're vehicles for her. Anything But You is another producing credit of hers, and then Immaculate, and each of them, I think, are showing the types of things that she can do. But we heard through the grapevine that Michael is actually a fan of the show, which is outstanding. We love hearing that any filmmaker likes to listen to this. And I'm not quite sure if this made it into the edit or not, but he even mentions a few things along the lines of previous shows that he had listened to sort of make it known that he'd been around for a while, which is great. I love that. I think that's fantastic. But we wanted to have Michael on anyway because of the types of conversations that Immaculate was bringing up. But we knew if we were going to have him that we wanted it to be a deep dive spoiler talk so that he wouldn't have to dance around his ending primarily, which is a lot of what the movie builds up to. And so Michael was nice enough to come on the show and do a full investigation into his movie, the making of it, what the ending means, where the story could potentially go from here. And he agreed to let us run it after Immaculate was in theaters. So this is your final warning. You need to have watched Immaculate before you go into this conversation. But once you've seen it, this is a great deep dive into a truly disturbing horror film from an up-and-coming filmmaker who has a ton of talent, and we are very happy is now a friend of the show, Michael Mohan, talking about Immaculate.
You're batting 1,000 with the entire ReelBlend group.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
I spent the majority of my interview talking to Sydney Sweeney about Elijah. So we're all in on this. So yeah, we're excited.
Amazing. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you all do a great job, even if you don't like the movie. Like your interview with the Madame Web filmmaker was really good. And then the way you talked about it after, I could tell how pained you were in it, but that's your job. Like, you did your job, and you're so respectful to everybody. I mean, that's awesome. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop nerding out. Thank you for having me.
It's usually the other way around. Yeah. Like we had Hans Zimmer on last week, and we all of us were like, oh my god, and it's literally just like that. It's just so thank you.
Of course.
And I want to kick off by letting everybody know, and we kind of said in the previous week's episode, like, your homework is to go watch Immaculate, because when we have you on for our episode, this is all spoilers. Like, we're going to just dive into the complete film so you can talk about everything you want to. And to show you how much of complete spoilers we're going into, I need to talk to you about not the scream and not the oneer, but the sound the baby makes when it's born. Wow. The squish is what will haunt me for the rest of my life. And then the sound that the baby makes, while it's on the ground. Please just tell me what you used to do each of those, because honestly, I feel like the movie loses 25% if those don't work.
Are we doing this? Are we in?
We're in.
Okay, great. Let's do it. Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, because so Brian Parker was our sound supervisor. Christian Minkler was our re-recording mixer. He did a little film y'all have seen called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Brian did this little film you've heard of called Get Out. And when we first tested the movie, it was a different sound.
Okay.
And that sound did not work. And the audience were laughing, but it was like the bad kind. Like, now I'm cool with them laughing, because it's like, it's so nerve wracking, and I want people to have a fun time with this movie no matter what. But it was like we had done something to like the sound of a baby goat. Like, there was a little bit of a bleat in there, and it did not work. And so we spent a lot.
That sounds haunting though. Like, that sounds like it would be terrifying.
It was campy. And so that was the main thing with this whole thing, is like, we just tried to go for, even though it's like the tone of the movie is kind of bonkers.
Sure.
Everything is sort of grounded in this like ish realism. And so he had to find, I believe what he found was the sound of a sick cat that he then pitched up and added a warble to. And that's that's what you hear. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Sydney talked a lot about how that was a wonder. It's the first take that they did that's in the film. And, Elijah was kind of following her around, seeing what she would be doing in that moment. And she did talk about what the idea of how much we show. And what it sounded like from her answer, and I could be wrong, was that maybe you did show different variations of what was going on in that scene. Was there ever a possibility of showing it? And I'm just curious kind of how you came around to not showing it, which I think is the better idea. It's like the Jaws effect. Not seeing the shark makes it so much scarier,
100%. I mean, this was the one thing. There were a couple things when I first read the script that that I wanted to do to it, and the main one was changing the ending. The script was it was originally a studio movie, and so it had a much more conservative. It wrapped up in a much more conservative way, and I was just like, when I read it, I was like, we need this moment of catharsis. Also, we're making this movie independently, so let's fucking go for it. No one's telling us not to do this. And so I had the vision for what this shot would be like 10 minutes after closing the script. My financiers and producers politely asked me to shoot alternates if on the off chance this grandiose thing that I had in my mind did not work. And me, I want to, some filmmakers would be like, no, fuck you, we're doing it my way. But like, I don't want that reputation. And also I'm wrong a lot of the time. Like, part of being a director is making sure that you're being responsible to the people who are paying for your movie. So, and I did not phone it in. We had the scariest looking practical puppet on the day that's there. You see it out of focus in the shot. You can see it. Yeah. It's red. It's covered in viscera. It was terrifying. We had tubes that went under that we had to bury in the ground. So the puppeteers were off to the side and they were sort of moving the arms and the stomach a little bit. But we never wanted that to be in the movie. They also asked us to do a take where at the end of the movie, suddenly before she's able to do it, two of those red veiled nuns come in and tackle her or grab her out of frame. And yeah, exactly. I mean, look, they're none of us, it's the end of the movie. Like, and I had never directed a horror film before. And I just, sometimes also my own confidence could be scared because I'm like, this is going to be awesome. They're like, okay, hold your horses, dude. Like we're spending money on this, protect us, And so
sure. Yeah.
We shot I shot all of that. My stipulation with shooting it was we're only going to explore these options if no distributor wants this movie because of this. And so they were gracious with me. I was gracious with them. But what is in the movie is it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite scene of anything I've ever done. And it's the closest thing where what's in my mind and what's on screen is identical. So I'm through the roof that people are through the roof about it.
Oh, it's amazing.
A quick follow up on that, though, because it is a oneer in the film. Did you shoot the alts as a oneer as well? Was the whole thing a oneer when you showed it fully?
No, we shot. It was because the only way to do it would be to cut insert to it, because if we did some camera, there was no way to motivate the camera move. So I just got like, when she had the rock up, it was like an over the shoulder down on it,
okay.
But what was great is like in our first test screening, we never, people wanted to see, we did cut it a couple ways just to like show the people who paid for this really expensive puppet what it looked like. And of course everybody, everyone who worked on this movie is very, very smart and reasonable. And so we were okay. However, at the very first test screening when we didn't have any sound for it, everybody in the audience, or not test screening, I mean like friends and family screening, right? Everybody afterwards were like heatedly debating whether or not we should show it or not. And finally, Jonah Ray. Do you know who Jonah Ray is? Comedian. He was the host of MST3K. He stood up and he was like, this conversation is what should be happening in the lobby. He fucking nailed it. This is what we want. And I was like, yes. And so,
yeah,
there it is.
You made the right decision.
Yes,
made the right decision.
You did.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
You talk about debates, which perfectly leads to my next question, because one of the first things I felt when the movie was over was I need more people to see this because I want to talk about it with people. That's one of the worst things about this job sometimes is you see a movie so early and no one else has seen it and you're like, fuck, I need to talk about it with somebody. There are a lot of things that in the best way possible sort of remain unanswered. And I'm always curious in that degree how much a storyteller has the answer and just chooses not to tell us. So I'm sort of curious how much you and Sydney discussed what happens after the cut to black, or like, would that baby have been the savior? Like, do you know the answers to these questions, or do you choose not to make the decision one way or the other?
So I have my reasons. I mean, I think to take a step back, like to not show the baby, right? Because I think there's two options, right? It's either like the Son of God or the Antichrist.
Sure.
Or it's something that is so, it's some genetically, it's funny. I need to talk about this very carefully because I don't want it to, it's a human, but it's been so genetically altered that it's on its dying breath. Okay. So that, but also, so those are the two options that are like physical that you could like picture. But if you don't show it, then that baby can represent something greater. That baby can represent her ties, either her ties to religion or her ties to the version of religion that she came into the movie with, or it could mean something completely different to somebody else in the audience. And kind of like, I don't want what I say to negate what somebody else might have, because we're finding that the movie is very personal to people. And at the end of the movie, just as many people who cheer at the end of the movie, there are people who like cry happy tears at the end because they see this rage personified that so many people feel right now. And so,
sure.
So anyway, so that answers that part of the question. The second part of the question of what happens after this movie, what happens to her. I can tell you, Christian Massini, our editor, he's convinced she dies because she has this giant gash in her belly. Right. She's bleeding out.
That makes sense. That checks out.
Yeah, she comes out of the tunnel, and we actually added a little bit of a bloom on the blood as she stands up in that big, shot that's sort of like after she climbs out of the tunnel. But also there's another possibility, which is there are 2 more nails out there. Are there 2 more labs somewhere in the world that she needs to go take down?
Oh, yes. And then she just goes there and fucks everyone up. That's what
Immaculate.
I want to see.
Immaculates.
Yeah, with the dollar sign.
With the dollar sign.
You get our show. You get our show, sir.
Well played.
Oh,
amazing.
That's fucking great. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to drop this sort of bomb on you, but there's a quote in the movie that resonated very deeply with me because I was raised Catholic and am still a practicing Catholic at this point. And they say, if this is not the will of God, why does God not stop us? Which is a question you can level at almost any problem, it's such a massive, like, if this is so bad, if cancer is so horrible, why hasn't God figured out a way to eradicate it, right? What does that line mean to you, Michael? Because I know that you have a deep Catholic background as well, too. There's so few horror movies that embrace Catholicism the way that yours does. And so it made that line stand out even more to me. And I just wanted to get your feedback on it.
Well, I think, oh boy, how much time do we have? I mean, I also feel like
I know.
Bring my therapist into this conversation. I mean, on its surface, so that line came from Andrew, and on its surface, when we were trying to search for something, the movie is so short, right? Like the goal was to make something lean and mean, and like all of the boring parts of most horror movies, we just don't have in our movie. And we expect audiences who are smart to be able to go from point A to point B to point C without like making them like wait for it. And one of the things that's incredibly truncated is her decision to rage. Other movies you might have like a montage showing like what her life is like now that she's held prisoner. And we just didn't have the time to shoot any of that. So Andrew came up with that line, if this is not the will of God, why does God not stop us? You see on her face, oh, I need to. It's like empowering for her, right? And there is an alternate interpretation of the film, if you wanted to, in that, what she's holding up at the end is a rock, and some people say, God is my rock. So you could also argue that, like, I don't want to just make this movie as like a troll to Catholics, like at all. Like, that's not my goal. I look at it as like, I need to say this correctly so that I'm sensitive to people who have deep beliefs. Because I genuinely, this movie's extreme, but religious people can enjoy extreme horror movies too.
I very much did. Yeah, I was not offended by it in any way, shape, or form.
Amazing. Okay, so I look at it as like, well, I'll just talk personally. That'll make it easier. There are aspects of Catholicism that I don't agree with.
Yeah, same.
I grew up super religious, and and you look at like sort of what's going on in Ireland right now. Like Ireland just passed a bill, I don't know whether they use bill, whatever their terminology is.
Sure.
Gay marriage is allowed in Ireland.
Okay.
69 to 70% of Ireland is Catholic. The Catholic Church told them, don't vote for this. And people were able to go, okay, even though I'm spiritual, I'm faithful, I believe in God, I believe in Catholicism, I don't believe that gay people shouldn't have the right to get married. And so that sort of give and take within our own religion is something that I think that, especially me, I grew up like 25 miles away from where Spotlight happened,
Oh, wow.
And so like, I think we all are reconciling the fact that this institution is flawed. And so to me, that there's some sort of, I don't know what the connective tissue is there, but there's something about that. Like, why does he not stop us? It's sort of like, it's on us to go, okay, wait a minute. No, this is fucked. Like,
because like it's almost like it's a 50-50 argument. If one side is saying God wants us to do this and the other side says, no, God wants us to do this, who's to say which one is right or wrong? It's a never ending conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so exactly.
Yeah.
As a little side note, before I get to my question, you're talking about her arc of rage and not really doing a montage. To me, the best representation of that is her not killing the chicken. And then later on, that whole foreshadowing arc is just brilliant to me because she earns it. She earns it from that moment forward. And you have to buy into why she would finally go over the edge. And I thought that was a really smart way to do it with her not killing the. So my question is this. The cinematography in this film is incredible. And a lot of what I would say, and I could be wrong, it looked like Sydney was lighting a lot of her own scenes. There were, with the flashlight, the candle, turning on and off the light in the room. And so I'm just curious what your conversations are like with your DP and Sydney when Sydney's kind of involved in the lighting itself in a way. And then the flashlight, the whole flashlight at the end is just like a huge part of it. So can you talk about those conversations?
I'm very lucky. My cinematographer, Elijah Christian, he was my roommate in college. He's shot every single thing I've done. Our first feature film was a $21,000 micro budget indie where like we had this, it was like me and him some days where he'd be operating camera, I'd be pushing the dolly and holding the boom mic at the same time, so like we're so interconnected that it's not like a typical collaboration. It's like collaborating with like your brother, And then Sydney has, we've worked together 3 times as well. So there's just this like very natural shorthand between the 3 of us where there's no like delineation, like there's zero, like something I just think people do their best work when they're not aware of a power dynamic. And so for us, it's just like, we're just figuring it out all together. And so the scenes, so to talk about the catacombs, that was purely lit from the flashlight. We had nothing else. We couldn't bring anything else down there. Those were real. Did Sydney tell you about what it was like to shoot down there? Because it was
no,
crazy.
I want to hear about it because she's lighting that scene. That's her lighting her own scene.
It's just and we're reacting to, and half of it was just improvised. We shot on the Sony Venice, and it was able to, pick, and the lenses were able to do it, and we had to, every once in a while would be like, oh, don't shine it so high, don't shine it so low. It wasn't that hard. The hard part was that there wasn't enough oxygen down there. So every hour and a half, we had to leave our stuff, go like walk half a mile to the surface, and then breathe for a half hour, and then go back down and shoot a little bit more. And we only had like 7.5 hours to shoot everything down there, including all of these breaks. So it was intense.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Oh, one more story. Since we're doing it. The other thing is so it was real. Like there were bones. If you picked them up, they were kind of mushy. And when we wrapped, when we were all going back to our cars, everybody was like, we were all blowing our noses, and it looked like mud because it was the particulate of dead bodies we had breathed in and had gone through our sinuses.
Yes.
So literally, we may now all be possessed by the ghosts of the people who.
Wow. Euphoria season 3 is going to be weird.
Yeah. Before Jake goes, when she's in confession and the father pulls back in the shot, that is one of the. Is that a dolly zoom? Is that a vertigo shot you're doing there?
Oh, geez. Okay. So, all right.
Sorry, Jake.
That's fascinating. So we built. So that took forever.
So awesome.
We had to shoot it a million different ways because we literally had to keep rebuilding the confessional booth. We added like a panel, and then we'd shoot a bit. Then we'd add another panel. Then we'd shoot a little bit just to make him seem like he was going further and further away. But then for the shot that actually pulls back on him, that is a digital effect. We had to extend it with like the set was digitally extended, and then on her end it's just a straight push.
Wow.
And yeah, it was very simple. Like it's super simple, but it just was complicated to shoot. Yeah.
Wow. I can genuinely promise you that the following question is a question I've never asked anyone else in my entire career. Can you talk to me about the team whose job it was to create baby Jesus fetuses to put into the jars? And what sort of conversations, because this is an interesting movie to talk about with anyone out of context. And when you sit down with any kind of an artist and sort of say, here's what I need you to make. Like what can you talk about those conversations and just the different versions of the baby Jesus fetuses that we got in the jars?
By the way, Michael, he's lying. He asks that at every interview. It's really embarrassing.
That's my what attracted you to the film.
Yeah, James Cameron made that for Avatar.
The one contribution I made to the one like sort of tangible contribution I made to the score there, that's my favorite thing, is Will Bates. He added a toy piano playing the melody over it in that moment, which I think really is what sets that up a notch. So those props, I'll have to ask Adam Reamer, but I know they were made of like doll parts and meat. And so that's really what it was. Like there's
I hate asking if anyone like kept a prop from a movie because that's such a lame junket question. But like, please tell me someone somewhere has them in there. Yeah, a jar with a baby Jesus fetus.
I have to say, every time I see our writer, Andrew Lobel, he's always like, where's my fetus? Like, dude, where's my fetus? And I was supposed to mail one back to him and we weren't able to do it, but I also worried that like it wouldn't make it through customs, because like what happens when the customs agent is like, what the fuck is this? No, but that was something we talked about. It's interesting. So can I tell you some more stories about that location?
Please.
So originally, it's funny. That's the one set that I wish we had more time and more money for, because it was so constrained. I could only get so many shots. But what we struggled with the visual information of originally we had photos of young nuns in front of each one of them, and we de-aged a bunch of photos of Isabel, the nun who tries to drown her, right? And so there was like 4 in a row of her. So you saw like, oh, they tried with her, then they tried again, then they tried again. But when we put them there, it's suddenly your eye was going too many places and you really just needed them to look at the fetuses. So if I could redo that sequence, I would have tried to make I would have made a much bigger meal of it than just that little hallway, which was where we had to shoot it logistically.
Also, you had to breathe, man. Like you had to, you only had so much time.
Oh, that wasn't in the catacombs. The catacombs, like basically after he becomes, we refer to him as the well done priest after he gets barbecued. From there until the fight is the catacombs, is the real catacombs. And then the actual fight was somewhere else. Yeah.
Michael, we talked to a couple different filmmakers who pointed this out to us, and it makes me think about this all the time, which is when you sit down for a movie, you don't know if it's the next Citizen Kane, or a complete train wreck. And it's only in those first 5 to 10 minutes that a lot of filmmakers believe you most have the audience's attention, right? Because they're sitting down and saying, what is this that I'm getting myself into? You have an incredibly brutal opening, from the leg break to the being buried alive. Can you just talk about your approach to that of how far you were willing to push your audience to make them feel uncomfortable, to almost let them know what they were about to get into?
Yeah, well, I think that was one of the designs of the film that we hoped people would take from it, is that the movie starts and there's the leg break, but like it almost feels like a typical horror movie. It's like, oh, it's the prologue. We know what's going to happen to her. And it was really just the decision to go, and then let's live with her in the coffin. Let's just wallow in that disturbing image, which, there's this movie. Oh, if I talk about the reference, it spoils the movie for you. Okay. There is a movie that was very influential. It taught me how to shoot in a coffin. And that was tricky too, because like to get a camera in there, we had to create like basically this modular coffin, right? Where like every shot has a different build of the coffin because it was hard to stick a camera in there. But the main reason was just to say like, hey, we're not fucking around here. Like this movie is going to go to some dark and wild places. And then the title comes up and you're hearing her screaming and you're just like, oh shit, she just fucking died. She's suffering down there, Yeah. And then the movie begins and it feels kind of traditional again until you get to sort of the main reveal,
It's horrifying. It's horrifying.
Yeah. The leg break was funny. Her foot, the prosthetic leg didn't fit into her shoes. And so we had to actually cut off the toes. And for a long time, I was carrying around her toes in my backpack. But then I brought them out in the sound mix and they were like, I just put them in front of me and everyone was like, what are those toes? And I'm like, oh, they're Simona's. And they were like, that's kind of creepy. And so I ended up giving them to Gabby, my co-producer. Her boyfriend loves Simona Tabasco. And so he now has her toes.
This might be the strangest conversation we've ever had on this show. Like the things that we're covering.
Bring it on. Let's keep going.
It's amazing. So I purposely skipped the trailer for this. So I didn't know really. I mean, I watched the trailer after I'd seen it because I was cutting together some stuff for my interview with Sydney. But there's a scene that I don't think would have hit me the way it did had I seen the trailer. And it's the scene where she gets out of the car and starts to run. And in that moment, I actually thought they were letting her go because of the way he looks at her in that shot. And as she's running across, I don't think you see the two guys chasing her for a little bit during the run. And so I actually thought she was getting away. But if you watch the trailer, I think you see her get tackled, or you see her get taken by them. And so I was just wondering, like that scene wouldn't have hit me that way had I seen the trailer. Do you think about those things in terms of like, and also, was that something you were going for in that scene? Did I read into the fact that they were trying to let her go and maybe she was just running away,
No, I just like I like the true answer is that I got a shot of her getting out of the car and starting the run and it sucked. And so I had to find a way to get out of that shitty shot. And so we just did a direct cut from her screaming to then that beautiful sort of landscapey shot. Christian Massini, I give Christian Massini all the credit because he was like, you don't need to see her get out of the car. Your takeaway from that is incredible. And I would love, really, you know what? I'm doing this wrong. It was totally intentional, Kevin. Like we had that plan from the beginning. It's like the mystery of it all. No, it was just a happy accident. And honestly, like the shooting of that sequence was one of the hardest. That was like, people always want to talk about the ending. That scene was way harder than the ending.
Why?
Because Sydney can run so fast that the two guys couldn't catch her. So we'd be shooting and I'd be like, okay, Alvaro, like Giuseppe, like get her. And they were like, we can't. Like Giuseppe smokes like 18 packs a day and they just couldn't do it. After the first take, they were then so winded, like they had ran like a crazy amount. Meanwhile, Sydney is like just, I don't know how she gets the energy. She just like subsists off of like Sour Patch Kids and gummy bears. But she was able to do it over and over and over again. Also, that was also a really, we didn't know it at the time because it was frigid that day. She was barefoot. We didn't realize that the ground was covered in nettles. And so the next day,
nettles?
Like nettles, like it's kind of like a plant that's kind of like a cactus, like with little tiny pricks.
Okay.
Oof. And so the next day, her feet were all fucked up from having basically run on this horrible surface. But whether that thing was intentional, it wasn't. It was a happy accident. And then I just rambled into the story.
Well, when he looks at her, though, I kept thinking, I'm like, is he kind of like letting her go here? That's what I thought, but I read into it wrong. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jake.
You know what's funny,
Michael,
too, is that... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, please.
Do you want me to just keep rambling and telling you all these stories?
Please.
Of course.
Okay. So that sequence, too, was supposed to be so much longer. Like, we spent so much time crafting... Like, there was going to be like a 20-minute sequence of the movie there where she got away. And where we played with how long until these two guys would catch her. So we had this sequence where she literally gets away, and then I was going to plan on the way there, like earlier on in the movie when she is on the way there, she passes by like an old vineyard where they make the wine for the ceremonies, and the vineyard owner was going to be like sort of another male character that pops up here and there. And then so she would escape, go to this vineyard guy, the winemaker's house, sneak into the house to steal his keys, steal his car, which was all going to be like one of those sequences where you think there's going to be a jump scare, but there's no jump scare. She starts driving down the street, and then there was this whole thing kind of like have you ever seen Funny Games?
Yeah.
You know that sequence where she like is trying to flag down the cars and she doesn't know whether to do it?
Yeah.
There's something like that. Where there was a car in her rear view, and she was wondering whether or not it was the car, whether it was, she just sees the headlights. She doesn't know who it is.
Right.
And then lofty director ideas. She smashed into a wild boar.
Yes.
And there was a car accident, and the car stops, and she's climbing out of the car, and you're like, oh, fuck, this is it. And it turns out to be this woman who's like a one of the things that's really interesting in rural Italy is there's so many prostitutes just randomly on the side of the road. And so she'd get into this car with this prostitute. They'd be driving. She would drive her to a train station, which was originally how she got there. We didn't have a sequence. We didn't have any of the airport stuff. It was all supposed to be on trains, but the church owns the train stations in Italy. And so we couldn't get permission to shoot in a train station. But she would find a payphone, and that would be where she was caught. And so all of that, we didn't have the time or the money to shoot any of it. So instead, we have her running in a field and then getting grabbed.
That poor boar missed its shot for stardom.
Yeah.
Yep. Michael, we're going to cut you loose on this. It's so interesting, talking to you in this conversation, because you're being very careful to be very respectful of people's beliefs, because this is a movie that people can interpret different ways based on their own faith. But I got to tell you, one of the most, I think, jarring promotional tactics, I think, in horror movie history, because I'm a horror movie fan, is the reel that Warner Brothers released when The Exorcist came out, of all the people walking out of the theater back in the 70s and their initial reaction. And one of the most jarring reactions was the images of the nuns. There's these images of the nuns coming out of the theater just distraught at what they just saw. And I just remember thinking, like, those poor nuns, like, my God, what they just saw, particularly in the 70s when you weren't seeing stuff like that. And I know that you're being respectful and you want to respect people's beliefs, but is there any small part of you that looks at this movie and goes, we got to get this in front of some nuns? Like we gotta put this movie in front of a couple of priests or some nuns, and we got to record their reactions immediately.
We just did that.
No!
Yeah, we just did that. Sydney sat with a priest and a pastor, and they did a screening and they recorded their reactions, and a video is coming very soon.
Oh my God, really? Whoa. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you there?
I wasn't there for it, but yeah, that just happened. Like they literally shot it a few days ago. So it might even be out by the time this interview drops. I don't know, but
what have you heard?
Oh my God. Yeah, what was their reaction?
We heard it was crazy. We heard it was crazy. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, apparently like one of them, I don't know if this is going to make the cut of the video, but like after she gives birth, like the woman on her left was just like, pick up your baby.
Oh,
pick up
really?
Your baby.
Right.
Why isn't she picking up her baby?
Oh, that's creepy. That's creepy. Yeah. That's too much.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait. Michael, we are so happy to have you on the show, man. This has been great.
Likewise.
And
likewise.
You want to just come on anytime? You don't have to have a movie.
Honestly, I'm here for it. You need like a guest to step in. I am 100% here for it.
Or Immaculate.
Michael, what are you doing next? Do you have your next project lined up, or?
There's a couple things that I'm weighing. You know, I think you know, it's interesting. I'm learning what audiences want from me right now, and it sounds like people want me to double down on the craziness of the ending and make a whole movie as crazy as the last act of this film. And so I want to deliver. Now that I have, like, it's weird, I have fans now, and so I want to give them. I want to make movies that are crazy and bold. It's hard for me to make them, but if I have an army of people saying like, give this man money to make weird shit, then I'm going to do it. So
you got for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
But the takeaway of this is that the 3 acts leading up to it, or the 2 acts leading up to the 3rd act, earn that ending.
Earn it. Yeah.
They earn it. True. Yeah. So, I mean, we've seen plenty of directors just go gonzo, and then it's like, wait a second, you had a lot of restraint in your.
Or I'll sell out and someone will offer me a giant movie and I'll
Amen.
Do that. And then
Amen.
I got 2 kids, you know.
Hey, listen.
I've been struggling for many years. So
the Jurassic franchise could borrow a couple of things from you.
We should do a crossover.
Why not?
Crossover. We could have a Jesus dinosaur.
I think that would be amazing.
Immaculate Park.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show.
So fun.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Shout out to Will Bates too, by the way. His amazing score in the film. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for coming on.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Bye.
And we are back. And as you will see, I'm joined by my man, Kevin McCarthy, who wanted to talk about Immaculate spoilers. Hey, Kev, how are you?
Good to see you, Jonathan. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, man. I thought Michael was a terrific interview. I thought he was so interesting and had such a real grasp on the type of movie he wanted to make and really not sort of bend away from the vision that he had. I loved when he talked about the specific length that he was going for with this film and knowing what needed to stay in and not stay in. We're going to get into a much longer conversation about spoilers on the main show, which is going to drop on Friday. But just overall, what was your take on Michael as an interview?
I mean, on a selfish note, when he first popped up on the Zoom screen and he was just so excited to see us, like that blew my mind because we're generally him in that moment, you know. And so like when Hans Zimmer pops up or Denis Villeneuve, like that's usually how we react. And so, you know, we've been doing this show for a long time now, and for to have an impact on a filmmaker that's making movies in Hollywood that somehow listens to our show. Like when we found out that Joseph Kosinski listened to our show with his son in the car, like that just blew my mind. I mean, he directed Top Gun Maverick, and he's like telling us that he listens to ReelBlend in the car with his son. It's like absolutely insane. And so it just blows my mind. And it's just nice to know that Hollywood in some way has embraced our show as an outlet, as Zimmer says, to kind of talk about the filmmaking process, and not to put words in his mouth, but basically the idea that we're trying to preserve that aspect of movie making. So that was the thing that struck me first. And the second thing was just kind of how like it's such a brutal film and such a disturbing movie. And then you talk to a guy who made it and he's just like fun. Like that always, like I interviewed David Dasmalchian recently, and people have been commenting a lot under it saying this guy plays villains all the time, and I can't believe how nice he is. And I always find that striking when you meet people who make something that's deeply disturbing and deeply controversial in a way, and then they have such like energy in a way to talk about it that's not like you would think the guy would be like way more like I don't know, like down and like really like in it and like serious, but he's really he's just a filmmaker, and you could tell he jumps around in genres. And I just thought that was a really fascinating way. Like, it's just jarring sometimes to talk to a filmmaker like that after seeing something so brutal, you know?
You know what I love though, too? I love the fact that he is still an up and coming filmmaker. It's not like he could get a blank check from a studio. So he talks about the limitations that he had on Immaculate. And like, remember the stories he talked about with the catacombs and breathing in the particles of the dead bodies that are essentially down there? I mean, this is like run and gun, independent guerrilla filmmaking that him and his crew are doing. And it just makes me admire all the more what they ended up with.
Yeah, it was honestly, that was really cool, because I remember talking to Sydney Sweeney about how she did a lot of her own lighting in the film with the flashlights particularly. And I didn't realize they were filming in real catacombs until Michael talked about that on the show. But all I kept thinking now, like you said, I kept imagining them walking back a half mile to go up, breathe for 30 minutes, come back down. And then didn't they say they were like coughing up?
Yeah, like phlegm, like blowing their nose later. And it was like corpse particles.
So brutal. So brutal.
I also just want to kind of circle back around to Sydney Sweeney and mention our good friend Josh Horowitz, who has a podcast, Happy Sad Confused, and he had Sydney on recently. And I really appreciated her candid take on Madam Web and how Madam Web established her relationship at Sony. Yeah. And that by doing that project, she was able to go to Sony with these projects that she was shepherding as a producer, one of them being Anyone But You, and then Immaculate she goes to Neon for. But it made me really appreciate the type of stories that she's going to fight for. You know, that she's using this power, that she's accumulating this cachet of influence, and that she's going to go after, I hope, you know, moving forward, sort of these edgier, you know, sort of not just mail in the safe, you know, blockbuster type film that I'm sure she easily could get cast in. It's a little discouraging to hear this news that like she's a front runner to become the next Bond girl, which just seems too easy. Like, I'd much rather see her do an Immaculate, you know, a type of Immaculate project than getting caught up in the machinations of being a Bond girl.
But maybe she'll bring a difference to the Bond girl. And I think there's been a lot of great Bond girl performances over the year. And I do think that like there's an emotional aspect to the Bond girl performance. But I do think that if Sydney Sweeney were to take on a role like that, I think that she would approach it in her own way. And she's a very talented, extremely gifted actor, like a lot of the other actresses who played that role before. But I do think for her, I just find her to be an incredible businesswoman. Like her whole career is just interesting to me. She's very smart and calculated about what she does. And I think that for her to take a role like that, she'd probably want to say, well, listen, I want to bring my own sense to this character. So I think that you wouldn't see her in that role unless you really wanted to take it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very true. And I'm not saying that I want to see more Immaculate films. I don't need them to wring a sequel out of this franchise, but the concept of them sending Sydney Sweeney's nun, you know, after those other laboratories that Michael brought up. Interesting. I was like, oh, you know what? I kind of want to see that. Yeah. That's okay. You can do that. And, you know, it's funny. We were just talking, we talk on the main show coming up about these co-directors, these two brothers who did Late Night with the Devil. And then we brought up the guys who did Talk to Me. And when Talk to Me ended, I didn't need to see more. But if those guys have an idea, and like if Michael Mohan has an idea of how he wants to continue, I'm kind of on board. I kind of do want to see what idea they go with. So again, thank you to Michael so much for joining the show. We're so happy to have him on. You guys, please go see Immaculate. Hopefully, if you made it this far into the episode, you have seen it already. We highly recommend it. And then come back to this week's Friday show, the main show. We're going to have Adam Wingard, the director of Godzilla Kong, on, as well as a spoiler-filled, deeper conversation into Immaculate. And we will react to the Bad Boys Ride or Die trailer. So we'll see you guys on Friday. Thank you for supporting ReelBlend. Give us a like and a subscribe. Tell your friends about a show, and we'll talk to you guys soon.